Welcome to the second part of the Bystander training at BFIT. Here we'll cover BFIT's consent policy. Within the Equal Opportunity, Harassment, and Non-Discrimination Policy is a section about BFIT's consent policy. This states that an individual who wants to engage in sexual activity of any kind is obligated to seek consent from all parties involved. This applies to all students at all times when they are enrolled at BFIT. In line with this, let's talk about what consent is not, and when it can't occur. To be effective, consent must be an informed, deliberate, and voluntary decision to engage in mutually acceptable sexual activity. Consent is an affirmative process. Silence, the absence of resistance, or the absence of a no does not constitute consent. It is the responsibility of the person who wants to engage in sexual activity to make sure that they have received consent from any person or persons involved. If an individual initiating sexual activity is not sure if they have received consent, they have an obligation to seek additional clarification. In addition, signals of consent must be part of a mutual, ongoing process, offered freely and knowingly. Ongoing means that each sexual act must have consent. For example, consent to kissing is not consent for other intimate acts. Consent can be given by words or actions as long as those words or actions create clear, mutually understandable permission regarding the conditions of sexual activity. However, relying solely on nonverbal communication can lead to misunderstandings and harmful consequences for all the parties involved, as this form of communication can be unclear. Consent is not based on the past sexual behavior of the individuals involved. Consent in a past sexual encounter between all the individuals involved does not mean consent is given in another separate sexual encounter. Flirting or suggestive behaviors and appearance are also not consent. If a person is mentally or physically incapacitated or impaired so that they cannot understand the fact, nature, or extent of the sexual situation, there is no consent. This includes being asleep or unconscious, as well as impairment or incapacitation due to alcohol or drug consumption that meets the standard. In addition, consent cannot be given by an individual under the age of 16 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This means that even if an individual under 16 says yes to a sexual act, it is not considered consent by law. Finally, consent cannot be given if it is forced or if it is given as the result of intimidation or threat. An easy way to remember consent is FRIES. F is for freely given. As I just mentioned, consent cannot be forced. R is for reversible. This means that at any point in a sexual encounter, that any participating individuals can revoke consent and choose to stop engaging in some or all sexual acts. I is for informed. Informed consent means that all individuals involved understand exactly what they are consenting to. E is for enthusiastic. Enthusiastic consent is the idea that consent moves beyond the initial yes and is shown by engagement and enthusiasm. When it comes to intimate acts, you and your partner or partners should only consent to things you want to do, rather than things you feel you are expected to do. And finally, S stands for specific. Specific consent means that consenting to one thing does not mean there is consent to everything. If someone says yes to going into a bedroom to make out, they are not consenting to sex. To wrap this section up, we'll watch the video Consent is Like Tea by Blue Seat Studios.
Just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
And there you have it, a simple but accurate description of consent. If you can understand when people want tea, you should be able to understand when people are consenting to sex. And that concludes this section of the bystander training. Remember, if you're not sure if you have consent, you should always clarify to avoid causing harm to another person. It's your obligation. Now please head over to the final section of this training on intervention skills.